In this video, we're talking about car photography and Lightroom. And more specifically, we're talking about how I edit my car photos in Lightroom to make them pop and make them stand out more. I'll show you guys some tips and tricks along the way that really works to enhance your subject and make your photo pop in general. But most importantly, I'll break down the two most important tools inside of Lightroom, in my opinion though, and that is color wheels and curves. So without further ado, my name is Christian. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let's go. All right, so this is the image that we're working with today. And as you can see here, this is the raw file. And I'll show you guys how I split the process up to make it more organized and easier to show you guys as well. As you can see here on the left side, I have this white Porsche preset. I have the basic adjustments, the curves, the HSL, and then I add the wheels. And all these together will make up a whole preset for this image. First thing I always do is to play around with the basic adjustments. Make sure that the image is cropped correctly and is straight. Trying to use the auto, and it did a pretty good job, but I'm not satisfied with what it did. So I use this one on one wheel and then drag it onto the next wheel, and boom. Much better. Perfect. I have it at 16 by 10 because later I want to splice this up in two in the middle here and make an Instagram post for it in Photoshop. And therefore you have to have it at 16 by 10. I can actually make a video about that as well, but I'm gonna just stick to Lightroom in this video. This is how this image looks after doing these adjustments. And the only thing I've done is to bump up the exposure, bump up the highlights, the shadows, a little bit the whites, and the blacks I pulled down to create contrast. Before, after, before, after. Pretty happy with that. All right, so the next thing I do is to mess with the tone curves. You can create contrast in the Luma curve. You can also create color contrast in the reds, greens, and blues. So if I pull this up, then I add blues to the image, right? If I pull this down, I take away blues from the image, which will leave me with yellows. And that's the same with this. If I drag this up, I add greens. But on the contrary, if I remove the greens, then it will look more magenta. The reds is the same thing. If I pull these up, you will get reds. If I pull these down, you'll get blues. If you have any questions about the tone curves, just hit me up in the comments and I'll get back to you in that way. Next thing I do is just to add the curves because I've already edited this photo, but I'll go over all the adjustments. So here, this is the Luma curve, which means that you're playing with the luminosity of the image. And that will give you contrast back in the image before, after, before, and after. As you can see here, I've made a control point right above the midtones, which basically is the midtones. And then also I made one here in the shadows and one more here. And the reason why I made one control point here is to kind of lock the shadows a little bit so they don't get so lifted. Again, any question you have about this edit, just hit me up in the comments. Next is the reds. As you can see here, I made a S curve. And by the way, to make super precise adjustments, you can basically just hit the option key, hold that in, and then hit the curve. So you hit the curve exactly where you want it. I pulled up these to add some reds in the highlights there, and then I lifted the midtones a little bit and dragged down the shadows, which means I'm introducing the blues in the shadows as well. Next thing I did was to add greens in the highlights and, added more of the magenta in the shadows. Same concept. This is the S curve as well. You can add blues in the shadows. Like, for example, let's say if I pull this up like so, you can see that it looks kind of cinematic and it's kind of dope. I could actually leave it at that because I really like this look, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just bring it down. I just wanted to show you guys how this works. And as you can see here, there's a control point in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So this is also a S curve, just like the greens and the reds. The Luma is not an S curve per se, but it's the same concept. Dragging down the highlights a little bit and, playing around with the shadows. Okay, so that is basically it for this one. Before and after the curves. So now that we're done with the curves, we can go on to the HSL, which is this one. So the HSL is super powerful. Here you can change specific colors in the image, and you can use this color dropper to see what colors are affected in the reds, for example. So if you go here, you touch there, you can see that this red right here is affected by orange and red, and that's usually what it is. Sometimes it might be yellows as well. And for example, the car is white, right? But sometimes there's color cast on the car because maybe it's green grass in the area where you're taking the photo, or the sun, or the sky is super blue. So there might be color cast from different surrounding things in the area that affects the car. So you can put your color picker on the car just to see what colors are affecting the car. And as you can see here, the yellow and the green is a color that is pretty much affecting the white color of the car. Anyway, I have the preset here, so I'll show you. Boom. When I hit that, you can see before and after, before and after. I basically changed the hue of the yellow from that to this. So it's kind of more of a reddish yellow in the image now. And that's the only thing I did on the hue. Onto the saturation, which is still the HSL. And here you're basically changing the saturation of a specific color. For example, the yellows that I just changed the hue to, I bring down because I don't want that yellow tones in my image. You see, if this is how it was, and then I can drag it down, and I can actually drag it a little bit further down like so. That's what we got now. And then I actually drag the greens a little bit down, just a little bit. I drag the aquas and the blues a little bit down. Perfect. It's looking really good already. And besides that, I haven't touched any other saturation slider in the HSL. And the luminance, it's the same concept, but here you're basically playing with the luminance. Bring this up a little bit to brighten up the whole image. So this is what we got now, and that's the HSL before and after, before and after. As you can see, there's a lot of yellows removed here and some green tint. That's probably coming from my polarizing filter because I have one that gives off a green tint that I've been noticing in my images. So yeah, that's a way to remove it. I wanted it clean and white and all that. So next thing I do is the color grading. So let me show you how this works. You have the midtones, you have the shadows, and you have the highlights. And here you can, you know, apply colors in any specific area of the image. For example, if you want warmth in the shadows, then you can pull the warmth there. Or if you want coolness, you can pull coolness there. And the further you drag this down, the more saturation you add of that color. Now I have saved the preset, so I'll just slap this on. Boom. And as you can see here, this is the before and after the color grade. So up until now, we basically just corrected the image and make the image look as natural as possible. And now we're grading it. It's basically like grading footage in DaVinci or Final Cut. You know, you got to make sure that all the contrast and all the things are right before you start grading. I like to look at it as that. So yeah, this is my grade, and I dragged magenta in the shadows, as you can see here, just a little bit though. And then I added a little bit of teal in the highlights, and then blue in the midtones. This is before and after. And one more thing you have to pay attention to here, guys, is that this one, the slider, is the shadow luminance. This is the highlight luminance, and this is the midtone luminance. Don't overlook these because they can really help you create more contrast in your image. And if I pull these down, then I get a punch of luminosity in the shadows with the color magenta. So it's really, really nice. I really like this feature actually. And I almost always use this just to see what it does, because sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. So sometimes it really looks good. And actually, I'll drag this a little bit further down like so. The blend, this is also a really nice slider that you can use to see how much of that color grade you actually want to have. And also you can go in here and see the whole color wheel in a bigger version kind of. And you can see how much luminance I have, the values of the luminance, and also the values of the hue and saturation. If I want to bump up the saturation here, I can just pull this to the side and add more of that same hue in the image, so it makes it easier. So let's say if I wanted to change the hue, I can drag the wheel like this, or I can just take this and drag it any way I want to. This is very handy as well. You can play around with this and see what works for you. It's something that you have to do again and again to really get a good feel for. But now you know that they are there. The midtones, as you can see here, I've dragged this a little bit down. And if I drag it further down, you can see that it creates more contrast in the image. And I really like that. So I'll actually drag this a little bit further down like so. And then I go to the highlights and see what I can do here. Actually, it looks kind of good if I drag it up like so. Yeah. Looks pretty good. I think that's too much though. So let's just leave it at 14. Okay, so this is the before and after the color grading, or using the color wheels. Okay, next thing is the details. And here, if you hold Option key and drag the mask, the sharpening that you're adding, if you're adding sharpening though, only affects the lines that you want to. So as you can see, all the white dots and white spots is where the sharpening is getting added to. So if I add a lot of sharpening here, all the sharpening will only be in the lines of the car. Honestly, I don't like to use it that much, but if I do it this way. And I tend to drag it up to, let's say 90 or 80, let's say 87. And I can drag it up like to 50, from 40 to 50, because I don't like to overdo it. And also make sure that the chromatic aberration and lens corrections are on. Transform, I haven't touched it for this video, and I don't actually like to use it that much. The vignette is not something I use so much in Lightroom. I rather make masks, which I will show you soon. And the grain here, I don't want to use grain in this. Calibration is also a really powerful tool you can use to change the values of the colors in your image, but I don't use it for this image. So yeah, now that we have added the basic adjustments, the curves, the HSL, and the wheels, we can start playing around with the masks. And the first thing I do actually is to add a gradient filter or a gradient mask. I drag it there like so, and then I drag up the exposure just a little bit like so. And what I like to do is to duplicate an invert mask. Boom. And then I can drag this down a little bit like so. Yes, looks pretty good. And if I double tap this, I can just call this vignette. I can, for example, call this car exposure. So now I know what is what on this mask. You can also use the brush, for example, to lift the shadows on the wheels like so, just to create more emphasis on the wheels. I think that's too much actually, so I'll just bring them down a little bit. Let's say 10. Yeah, that's enough. And now the car is looking pretty good. What I could do is to bring down the clarity of this image and then bring down the texture as well, just a little bit. So what I could do as well though is to add a new gradient filter like this, and then add a little bit of warmth, just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, like so. I could also make another mask and drag this up here and lift the blacks a little bit like so. Before and after, it looks like it's foggy, it looks more moody. So yeah, that's just a way to do it. And also readjust this a little bit. I think this is looking pretty good. The final step I always make when I edit photos is to clean the image up. And usually I go in here, I go into the edit in Photoshop. But in this case, I just want to keep it simple. So I'm using the stamp tool. I go over all these imperfections in the pavement here. And actually this looks pretty clean to begin with, to be honest. Sometimes you have cigarettes and garbage and shit like that on the ground, but that's also one thing you can be mindful of when you are shooting, just to clean the pavement. Yeah, I will be making a video about how to shoot cars as well in the future. This is pretty much how it works. If you want to go crazy, you can actually go crazy and clean up the whole pavement so you don't get so much distractions. And what you also can do is to use this mask that I showed you here, drag down the texture a little bit, not so much though, just like 4. Boom. There we go. Yeah, so I think now we're done. Let's see the before and after. So yeah, pretty happy with the results like this. Yeah, tell me what you think in the comments. That is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a like. That would mean a lot to me. And also, if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Make sure to check me out over at Instagram, where I post when I'm not posting onto YouTube. And also, I'm working on a preset pack that I will release as soon as it's done. I have like 5-6 presets that I'm really happy with, but I will try to work a little bit more to make them better, and also add a couple of more presets to that pack. So stay tuned for that as well. Again, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Peace.